If you recall, a day after President Trump announced the liberation tariffs, the South African authorities went out and released a couple of statements. And the messages were clear. It was that we are interested as a country in retaining the market access in the US. And the second point that they mentioned was that we have to work on diversifying our export markets for a number of sectors of our economy. And of course, here in AgriView, we are concerned more with agriculture. And I've seen this comment going around where people are saying, look, if the US is giving South Africa some challenges in terms of the access, one, it is not as big. Two, why don't we just go to other markets in China and elsewhere and send our products there? On the first point that the US market is not big, it is not big when you're looking at it in a perspective of the overall agricultural exports, which are close to 14 billion US dollars. And of course, the US is about 4% of that. In value terms, around about $500 million US dollars, but it still matters for the industries that export to the US. The citrus farmers, the nuts, the table grapes, wine, amongst others. Those are the folks that are exporting to the US in agriculture. And of course, they are concentrated in particular provinces. There are jobs and the supply chains that are interlinked to their businesses. And these are the value chains that have been built over a number of years as we were enjoying this duty-free access to the US for a range of products. Now, switching that to another market is not something that can be done overnight. Before you export, yes, there is a trade agreement aspect of it. There's a phytosanitary aspect of it, but there's also a business dealings, the practical day-to-day of managing relationships, as well as logistics and ensuring that you can be able to move the product to another market. Now, developing all of that takes time. There's also an aspect about the taste of the products. You cannot just say, look, the US can't take table grapes in this volume. They are putting on tariffs. Take these table grapes and send them to the Middle East. But the question you have to ask is whether the Middle East consumer is able to pay the amount of money that the US consumer was willing to pay for those products, as well as the time it will take to establish those practical relationships, the shipping routes, and all of the logistics that are associated with that. These are the practical considerations that I think we must have when we are thinking and talking about the diversification. This is all to say then, we have to keep working on ensuring that we regain the better access in the US in competitive terms, like many of our competitors, either it's Chile or any other country that export the similar products that we send to the US. But the export diversification is not a conversation we must stay away from. This is all just to say it takes time. It will not be an overnight success. I mean, we have seen China, for example, coming out saying, look, South Africa, we are open to absorbing as many agricultural products as we can. And we appreciate that. And the Chinese ambassador has gone across the country visiting a range of farmers. I know that in June, he was up there in Limpopo seeing our colleagues that are in the macadamia space and some that are in the citrus industry, and seeing them with quite an optimistic message, as any ambassador should, because ambassadors, you are in a way a salesman for your country. So it was important that he does that. But the aspect of opening up the Chinese market do not only lie on the ambassador's words. The ambassador's words are a signal. The next steps then is about the South African government engaging with the Chinese authorities to ensure that whatever the tariffs that are there, they are lowered. And let me tell you, we do face higher tariffs in China. You ask anyone that is in the wine industry, they will tell you that the tariffs they face, they range anywhere between 14 to 20%. Those that are in macadamia and the other products, they will tell you also about the double-digit tariffs that we experience or we face in China. And many people do not talk about this. So the core thing then with the Chinese market is about lowering those tariffs. After the tariffs are lowered, making sure that the terms of how the businesses can actually do trade with China is something that is ironed up. I anticipate that will take time, but I do think that it is now where we should start that conversation. But I also have an issue with seeing the friction in the US and thinking that the US must be replaced with another market. I don't think that's the approach that we should be taking as South Africa. Remember, for a long time, we have been talking about our ability to potentially increase the production in our farms. Now, we cannot increase this production while at the same time we are paying less attention to certain markets. Where are we going to take those products? We have then to work on expanding other markets while trying to revive the relationship with the US and retain the relationships and the trade patterns that we have with other parts of the world. Either you are thinking about the African continent, the EU, much of Asia, the Middle East. This is a building process that we should be in. South Africa's agriculture and our economy in general, we will thrive on multiple relationships rather than focusing on particular areas. And these things are not mutually exclusive. You can try to fix issues with the US while at the same time opening up China and talking to the Middle East, retaining access in all of the other parts of the world. And that's the approach that South Africa should take. That's the approach that also will serve the farmers better. And I'll tell you what, it may not be you who's directly exporting a product, being a relatively bigger player that is exporting, but with them exporting that product, what they do, they create space for you in the domestic market. So indirectly, through the price transmission, you benefit. It doesn't matter whose product lands in China. What matters is that the South African product will land in China. And that, I think, in turn benefits everyone. The jobs, the better prices, which those better prices are key for the sustainability financially of our farming entities. And I think that's the core of this whole export diversification question. Now, this is an opportune time to actually have this conversation with the greatest focus. Because remember, the ministers that made this point, it was the minister at DERCO, Minister Ronald Lamola. It was Minister at the DTIC, that's the Department of Trade and Industry, Minister Park Stow. It was them reading this statement and talking about the export diversification. And a day before they read that statement, the presidency came out saying we will have to work on reviving and retaining the market access that we have in the US, while at the same time looking elsewhere in the world, which means then that at the highest level in Pretoria, the thinking around export diversification is there. But what matters now is the delivery aspect of it. And that delivery aspect does not lie only in the top administration of these departments. I think private sector, the researchers in South Africa, and all of us, even talking heads like myself, at least in this show, of course, I do a bit of research, you know that. We have to try to point to the direction at which the things should go and saying, look, if you are in government, these are the markets, these are the way at which we should be approaching each and every country. And I think that's the place that as South Africa we should be at this moment. We were good in this, by the way, as a country, because if you look back into our history, we had a period, of course, where we were not integrated with the world. But once we were integrated with the world after 1994, think about how much our agricultural exports have grown over time. In year 2000, our agricultural exports were around $2 billion US. Last year, just under $14 billion US. That speaks both to the increase in production, but most importantly, the export markets that we've opened over time. And I would say that in the periods between year 2000 all the way to roughly 2015, 2012. That was a period at which we opened as many export markets as we can as a country. We have greater access in Africa, what we have in the EU, even what we have now with the UK and many other countries. Those are some of the arrangements that we agreed upon at that time. And I think South Africa should take that focus that we had in the early 2000s and that energy and those capabilities and make sure that those capabilities are there at the departments. Because it's one thing to agree at a political level, but we have to ensure that people are capacitated, the mindsets are aligned as to what we want as a country, and we continuously argue then for that. And this trade talk is not going to be easy, by the way, this time around. In the early 2000s, everyone was talking about globalization. Everyone remembered South Africa's painful history, and we were open to engaging with South Africa. But today, the climate has changed. People are looking inward. We are hearing more about geo-economic tensions, trade fragmentation, which means then South Africa, as we're going out to the world, we are no longer going to be as welcomed as we were in the early 2000s, which means then even the way we engage in trade, it has to change. It's going to be a give and take. We can't want other people to take more of our products while we are not willing to make some certain trade-offs. And that speaks to this idea that we may have to be moving away from the unit unilateral arrangement to more of the bilateral agreements, bilateral trade agreements that as a country we must embrace, which means there will be losers and winners in the South African market. Of course, it's painful. No one wants to select to say a particular industry will be exposed to increased competition of imports, because every industry believes that it is important. Every industry believes that it deserves an opportunity to increase its competitiveness and export. But I think those are the hard choices that the South African policymakers will be faced with at this time. And that comes with this idea opening up as many free trade agreements as we can. And I think that's the mindset shift that amongst us as researchers, the lobby organizations, the government officials, and everyone else that is in the policy space needs to know that this time around, there are those trade-offs that are painful that will have to be made in order to ensure that South Africa continues to enjoy as much access to the world market as we can. And this brings us, by the way, to this point about China. China has said that, look, we want to open up our market for a range of goods coming from the African continent. But if we go with what China said, in a way, an argument can be made that it puts us in the same point that we have been with the U.S. Because the U.S. extended AGOA. It is a unilateral arrangement, and we enjoyed accessing that market in those duty-free access for a range of products for a number of years. But whenever there are geopolitical disagreement, misalignment, political tensions, you name it, that presents and puts that relationship at risk. Is that the arrangements we are willing to go with China? And I would say for the immediate and medium term, we could go with that relationship, because China may not be raising a number of tension. It may as well be that we are aligned on a number of interests to the world. And if that's the case, then this may benefit us in the immediate and medium term. But I think for long-term sustainability, to hedge against any risk, it is always advisable, at least in my view, that we try to graduate from that unilateral arrangement that they are talking about and move towards more ambitious bilateral trade agreement with China. And I think that's the approach that may serve the South African agriculture well in the long term. And look, we have to think about long term, because our sector is not yet at capacity. We have over and over made the point that this is a sector that could add plus 30% in a gross value added. More land could still be tilled. More people could still be absorbed in the sector to work and participate as farmers and as various industry services in the value chain. For those people to participate efficiently over the long term, it does mean then we have to ensure that we have greater access and for a sustainable period in key markets like China and the others. And I think our focus should not end in China. I mean, I've made the arguments in a number of writings that we actually have to be thinking about a strategy of South Africa-Middle East trade approach. And I think the Middle East is very exciting. I mean, if you look at the size of the markets in the Middle East, I mean, think about Saudi Arabia. They import plus $20 billion of agricultural products each year in. You look at Qatar, the numbers are plus $4 billion. You look at the UAE, the numbers are as interesting as what you see in Qatar and the other countries in that region. And they cannot produce the products that we want to sell to them, which is why then deepening access in that Middle East market is very exciting. And this is a market that can pay. I mean, look at it. They have the resources. They are doing reasonably well. And I think they can pay for some of the products that we produce as a country, which is why then ensuring that we nurture the relationship with the Middle East while at the same time retaining access to the other regions. That's the thinking we should be having as South Africa when we are considering our approach in terms of trade, our approach in terms of investment. And I do think that we can ensure that the Middle East has a stake in the game in South Africa. I mean, if I think back a few years ago, we had the agricultural minister from Saudi Arabia coming to South Africa, and they were looking both at buying some product from us, but the opportunities for investment, which is why I think that we have to promote areas at which many people from outside, they can come and invest in South Africa. FDIs in agriculture, that's the conversation that we should have. And I think the researchers in this space must be writing a little bit more about the FDI opportunities in the South African agriculture, food, fiber, and the beverages industry, so that the Middle East and the others can not only just be the market, but they can invest in South Africa for the possibility of exporting some of the products to their countries or elsewhere in the world. And I think that's the approach we should be taking, in addition to a number of things that we have been talking about when we are considering this story of South Africa's agriculture. And that's the trade, that's the investment, that's the orientation I think is important for this period. And of course, not everything is about trade. There are some near-term things that are happening in South Africa, and they are excellent. I mean, if you think about now the agricultural conditions, we've made the point that we are expecting an excellent grain crop. We are expecting excellent yields when you think about the horticulture, fruit, and as well as vegetables, but also our friends in the winter grain industry, as well as the regions in the Western Cape, they've been receiving superb rainfall at this moment in South Africa. And if you look at the numbers that are coming out of the province, yes, we may have been worried that the rainfall is too much and is damaging at a household level, and that you can see as you fly in or you drive around the Western Cape. But if you talk to the farmers and you are putting aside a little bit the issues of the household, in the agricultural sector, the rains have not been as damaging. We are hearing a much more optimistic message about where the winter crop season is looking. But of course, we will know more as how much of the winter crop harvest South Africa will have later in the year. So for now, all of this rain has rather been more beneficial, which means then that we are still in a year of a recovery as a country. We have an excellent grain and oilseeds crop. We also are expecting better production conditions in the winter crop. The fruit and vegetables are doing well. The only challenge that we are having, which is more pressing, is, of course, in the livestock and poultry because of these animal diseases. But those are all the near-term things, folks. I think for the long term, many agriculturalists will agree that few things are as important as ensuring that South Africa participates robustly in terms of the export markets, which brings us back to the points that I have said about our orientation in terms of trade and investments this time around. And I think that's what South Africa should be focusing. Trade is everything. Biosecurity, infrastructure, and all other matters are the enablers, but trade should be central. Thanks for listening to us, and please do subscribe to our channel and spread the word.